from the two key areas of Tunisia, North Africa, and Egypt, and hear from Parvaneh Hosseini, who has a lot of insight into the 2009 Green Movement in Iran and what the lessons learned are for this Egyptian context.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Well, I would like to, the question is dictatorship or democracy in Middle East, and my topic is lessons from Iran. I would like to assume that the lessons are for my own people, as I'm not in the position to, give any lessons to other people. But if, I assume that if another social movement happens in Iran, what lessons we should take from 1979 revolution as well as 2009 Green Movement from Iran. In order to achieve democracy and prevent a new dictatorship to take over, certain conditions need to be fulfilled. One, the people should keep on owning the revolution. They should never assume that they have done their jobs and it is the others' tasks to take care of the process of democratizing the country. Two, people should not let any single leader or party to take over. They should make sure that a team of diverse political interests represent various types of people at the higher levels of political system of their country. Three, if the right of any group or even a single person gets violated by the new state, it is everyone's responsibility to oppose against it immediately before it is too late. Four, the new state should feel commitment to the international human rights values and organizations. For this one, I would like to emphasize because I feel that in comparing 1979 revolution and Middle East recent movements, this has not been so much, it has been kind of ignored. Taking lessons from other revolutions here in 1979 revolution is not just making sure that you do not fall into the same trap. For example, Islamic fundamentalism. We need to be aware of the danger of other type of traps. We should be careful not to take refuge, especially in some other kind of potentially anti-democratic forces out of fear of what we are just focusing on now. Regarding comparing Green Movement in 2009 and Egyptian protests, well, the similarities are obvious. People are out, they want their democracy, and as much as they hate dictatorship, they hate violence. So they are finding their own ways, the most non-violent ways to protest. But the sad part is that the governments are finding similar ways to suppress them, like military forces and arresting, threatening, banning, or endangering journalists, bringing, cutting down internet, and the most shameful of all, bringing out so-called pro-government people to face other people, indeed putting their own people fighting one another, which is so heartbreaking. Of course, the difference between Green Movement suppression means of Green Movement and Egyptian revolution was that all this were much more severe in Iran. Police force never stopped crushing down the protest. Foreign journalists were banned and they were out of the country. Arresting were much wider. Many activists, even human rights activists, students, they were arrested and they were tortured, they were threatened. And foreign support was, much less than the revolution in Egypt. So just in general, 2 points I would like to make, 2 points which needs to be considered. One for people within the nation, one foreign support. Within the nation, people should not get paralyzed by the fear of disagreement among their own people. Denying disagreement does not help either. We need to admit that we do have some disagreements, but we are trying to find a democratic way to live together without harming one another. The second one, foreign support. We need support from democratic countries, from human rights organizations, and especially from other people in the region and in the other people of the world. This very recent unity among the people in Middle East recently shows how empowering it can be, and things would be different if these protests were not in this united form and in this chain form. So this brings up the power of support from other people to the people who are uprising for their democracy. Thank you.
All right, and now what we're going to do is shift into the reverberations of this wave of revolution in the eastern part of the Arab world. And we'll start with Dr. Scott Lucas talking about Yemen.
Good afternoon. I thought we were going alphabetically, but that's fine. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been to Egypt before? Okay. How many of you have been to Yemen? All right, good. I had the pleasure as a student of studying Arabic in Yemen. It was a fantastic place, and I can't test how it is right now for studying Arabic, but it hopefully will be a fantastic place in the future. It's a very beautiful country. The people are some of the most hospitable people I've met in my life. Extremely generous, like the Egyptians, but a little more so. And the only time Yemen is ever in the news is when something horrible happens there or something horrible emanates from there. So that is why I'm stressing it's a beautiful country, wonderful, wonderful people. I can't really say much for the food right now, but wonderful people, wonderful country, and that's something that came back to mind, because the statistics are always very depressing when we hear them. There are 24 million people, 44% are under the age of 14, the average woman has 4.8 children, 50% literacy rate, only 2.9% arable land, 35% unemployment at least, and anybody know how many rivers are in Yemen? Zero. Zero permanent rivers. They get a little rain in parts of the country. So, and the president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, has been in power since 1978. So, looking at these protests, and I believe there were about 20,000 yesterday, and certainly 20,000 is no small number in the city of Sana'a, which has, now I think it's about 2 million. It had 1 million when I was there in the 90s. Now I think it's up to about 2 million. But you also had an equally large pro-government rally. And unlike probably many, if not most of the other pro-government rallies we see, the president actually does have a lot of support in Yemen. Now, I don't know that particular group, if they're, how they got there, but there is a lot of support for the president. And if you look at, or want to make a hierarchy of challenges facing Yemen, political liberalization is pretty low on the pressing needs of Yemen. The first one I would mention is water. As I said, there are no rivers. There's not a desalination plant yet. There are efforts to get one, the realization they need one, but it hasn't been funded and hasn't received the backing from any countries or from internally. So that's a serious problem. In the major city of Taiz, there literally is water once a month through the pipes, and everything else has to be trucked in. And that's a pretty good-sized city. So you can imagine this is probably the biggest challenge facing Yemen right now. Secondly, the economy. They're running out of oil, which covered 70% of the government's expenses. So once there's no more oil, that's, as you can imagine, a very serious problem, especially the bloated bureaucracy. And one reason there's so much unemployment is during the first Gulf War, the Yemenis believed that the Kuwait-Iraq issue should be settled by the Arab League, and that wasn't seen as the right choice in the eyes of the American government and in the eyes of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and so 1 million expats who are working were sent back to Yemen. So you can imagine how devastating that was on the economy, having 1 million young men, probably some not so young men, sent back and no jobs really there for them. You've also, since in 2009, had a minor to mid-minor, I'm not a political scientist, so I'm not sure how you would exactly classify it, but we've had a revolt in the north since 2009 called the Houthi Revolt. It's a group of Zaydis. Every now and then they stray into Saudi Arabia. Every now and then you hear reports of large numbers of people getting killed or having to leave their homes. This is something that's been going on, not easy to see how that'll be solved. The South unified with the North in 1990. This is one of the relatively few cases of unification between two countries, in part because the oil is right near the border. And in the process, the South pretty much got nothing, and the North got everything. And so you can imagine there's been some discontent, and there was a civil war in 1994, actually, when I was there. So there's sort of a renewed secessionist movement in the South. And then America's primary concern, and America has been upping its assistance, primarily military recently, is al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has relocated from Saudi Arabia to central Yemen, where there aren't roads, or paved roads. So you can pretty much imagine it's a nice place to hide out. But apparently there's internet access because they are publishing their English magazine there. So this is a very serious concern, of course, in America and the West. But in Yemen, this is once again sort of lower than running out of water, oil, and jobs, and of course a secessionist revolt in the North and potentially in the South. And then finally, there are issues of political secession. There isn't a clear successor to Ali Abdullah Saleh. He announced recently he is not going to run again in 2013. Technically, Yemen is a democracy. There were elections, there have been elections. I think the parliament ones were postponed. There are other parties, although the ruling party has by far the most seats. But this is a big issue as well. Who will succeed? And the final thing to keep in mind is that tribes are still extremely powerful in Yemen. This is a very significant issue as well. And while there may be some liberal democratic tribes out there, many of them operate on other principles. So, thank you.